It's time now for Reform UK leader Richard Tice. Now, former Tory Deputy Chair Lee Anderson's political future looks uncertain tonight after he was controversially suspended by the Tory party for suggesting that Islamists had, quote, got control of London Mayor Sadiq Khan. Well, speaking hours ago, Mayor Khan had this to say.
It's been more than 2 days now since this senior Conservative made comments that were clearly racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic, and still no firm condemnation from the leader of the Conservative Party, the Prime Minister. The problem is you have a senior Conservative saying things that are clearly racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. That's leading to an environment where anti-Muslim crime is spiralling, and what they're doing is pouring petrol on the flames of Islamophobia.
All right, so Lee Anderson is now tipped by some to join forces with Richard Tice's Reform UK, and Richard Tice himself said in a statement that Lee Anderson may have been clumsy with his precise choice of words, but his sentiments are supported by millions of British citizens, including myself. Never has Westminster and the craven left-leaning establishment been so out of touch with ordinary people. He goes on, but he's here himself, so I'll let him answer the rest of it. It's worth reminding everybody that Lee Anderson is going to be talking in a box office interview a little bit later on this show. But Richard, so when's Lee Anderson joining you then?
Look, I'm not giving a running commentary of any discussions I have with any MPs of whatever, because look, no, those are matters that are confidential. I'm not doing that. But what I am saying is I think tens of millions of British people support the sentiment of what Lee was trying to say, which is the streets of London every week are being taken over by intimidatory thugs, extreme Islamists who are bullying people. They are anti-Semitic, they are pro-Hamas. I've been into a couple of these demonstrations to ask them nicely, will they condemn October the 7th? Will they ask for the release of the hostages? And the answer every time is they won't answer that question. The last time I did it, a couple of weeks back, they shouted at me, they abused, they intimidated me, they shoved me, and they ramped up the music and the megaphone. I'm telling you, that is what is going on, and the British people are furious about it.
Lee Anderson is regarded by many as the red wall made flesh. If he defected to Reform, that would be a massive boost for you, wouldn't it?
Well, look, let's wait and see what happens. It'll be interesting to see what your interview with Lee is later. But I think the real point is just how out of touch the establishment is, the two main parties. You know, whilst they get a little bit sort of offended by the order of a few hurty-worty words, let me tell you what's going on the streets. On the streets, people are frightened. The Jewish community are frightened, the MPs are frightened, Londoners are frightened. I've had candidates and staff across the country being given death threats, being forced to move house. This is what's going on at the moment up and down the country. You've got shops and kebab shops being closed down because they're selling the wrong brand of clothing or the wrong type of Coke, for heaven's sake. This is serious. That's what matters to people.
If Lee Anderson was a Reform MP, would you have removed the whip for what he said?
It's a really good question. It's a hypothetical, and I think the bottom line is Lee has admitted it was clumsy. He was angry. He was frustrated. Frankly, I'm angry. Millions of British people are angry because the authorities, they have been weak, they've been gutless, they've allowed this to happen. I called for these marches to be banned on October the 11th. I was right. These people have ignored me.
Look, I do think, Richard, with respect, it is important for people to understand that if Lee Anderson or people with Lee Anderson's views are thinking of voting or joining Reform or standing for Reform, they need to know whether or not, if they make these remarks, they would lose the whip from Reform.
Yeah, look, as I say, it's clumsy, but actually the sentiment of what he was trying to say is 110% right. That the streets of London and other towns, frankly, they are being taken over by these thugs, these bullies. Even the police are now scared. They wouldn't even take down the projection of an anti-Semitic message on Big Ben, which broke the law, I think it was last Wednesday evening. And with proper leadership, I tell you, if I was in charge of the Met Police, we'd be in a completely different place to where we are now. We wouldn't have this fear, we wouldn't have this intimidation. That's what leadership is all about.
Do you think he was wrong to suggest that Sadiq Khan has been under the control of Islamists?
I don't actually think that's what he was trying to say. I just think he was frustrated with what's going on with this great city and other towns. I think what he's saying is our streets are being taken over once or twice a week by these people popping up, and they are not what the British culture is about. They're not what we're about. And if you create a vacuum, if you leave a vacuum, evil people will fill it. That's why you need leadership, and that's what Lee was asking for, and we're not getting it from... Let's remember, Sadiq Khan is in charge of the security of London, and he's utterly failing, as is the Met chief, Sir Mark Rowley.
All right, OK, well, look, there's a heck of a lot more to come from Lee Anderson later on in this show. We have got an exclusive interview with him and our political editor, Christopher Hope. He does address the point of reform, so no doubt you'll be watching, and no doubt Rishi Sunak will be as well. But just about got time to touch on a different story with you as well. So new research has shown that slashing net migration to the UK would leave Brits more than £1,100 a year better off. Analysis from former Prime Minister Liz Truss's Growth Commission has found that a reduction in net migration to 150,000 a year would reduce GDP overall, but crucially would increase GDP per capita, leaving more money in our pockets in the long term. Richard, is it fair to say that cutting migration would make us all richer?
Oh, completely. It's basic economic common sense. Because what you're talking about, if you've got mass immigration, you are increasing the supply of labour, and therefore, guess what happens? The price of that labour goes down. It depresses British wages. I want a shortage of labour so that actually the price of that labour, the lowest paid, the least well off in this country, it goes up. Then if a business can't afford the labour, it invests in capital equipment. That's how economies have worked for the last 200 years. That's how the combine harvester was invented. There's no surprise to this information. The person who is surprised is Liz Truss herself, because she was pro-mass immigration. She was part of the government that's allowed this post-Brexit.
OK, Richard, look, thank you very much for your time today. That is Richard Tice, the leader of Reform UK.